what is the issue with youth violence, really? Because a few days ago, we heard about situations happening at Burgess Park, young people being arrested in Lewisham. We've had a situation in Clapham. It's like every time you think it's better, it's still there. What is the problem with youth violence?
90% of our brains develops before the age of 5 years old. So any unmet need or exposed to trauma is going to be seen later on in years.
When it was a knife incident or a gun crime at the time, or a gun incident, it was big news. Resources were cut, youth work went, schools were changing, they're becoming academies, the local authorities were responding to different ways in that we lost Sure Start. When you lose all of those services to young people that are highly need that service, you get this mixture of problems.
A lot of the people that are in prison now have learning difficulty.
Young people usually have this mask when they're at home, they take it off when they go out.
There's a lot of misinformation. And if you're a young person who's experienced trauma, it may be difficult to differentiate who is a good role model and who isn't.
Welcome back to Echoes of Our Community. It's a pleasure to have you here once again. This is a platform where we look at different subjects and topics, and I'm always excited to bring wonderful people onto this podcast because we talk about stories, real stories that impact on our lives, our communities, our families, even the work we do together as professionals. And today we are having a wonderful, I put that wonderful in quotes because the topic we want to look about, you might not look at it as wonderful, but I want to say it's wonderful because it's at the right time. It's something that we need to discuss. And I'm excited today. So I want to say welcome to you. If you haven't already, I would like to encourage you to please subscribe, please like and share, because we need people, we need families, we need everyone to hear about what we're talking about. And my name is Margaret Taribo and I'm your host. But today I have two wonderful guests with me. I have Ollie and I have Ryan. And we're going to be talking about youth violence. Now, I want to prepare you. This is going to be a 4-part series. And so we're going to be talking about every aspect possible. So let's get on to it. Today, and at this point in time, we're going to be looking at youth violence, but we want to look at it from the angle of the problem itself, the root, the issues. Why do we have youth violence? And this is where we're going to start from. Who are you, Ryan?
Well, my name's Ryan. I've been in the sector for 20 years now, long time. And similar to Ollie, I didn't expect to be a youth worker.
Okay.
When I was, say, in my late teens, early 20s, if you would have said to me, where would you be in 20 years' time? I'm sure my age there. But if you would have said where I would be in 20 years' time, I wouldn't say that I would be sitting down speaking to yourself about a sector that has given me a lot of experience and I've been able to impact so many young people. I started off as a volunteer on my local estate in Brixton Hill.
Wow.
I come from South London in Lambeth Borough. And because I used to play football a long time ago, there was a community centre and they needed people to help coach football. And I was sitting in a park, and I was just sitting there with like a friend of mine, and a neighbour came to me and said, do you want to do some coaching, Ryan? So I said, I've got some spare time, I'll do some coaching. And then from there, I went on to become a part-time youth worker, went on to be a project manager.
Wow.
I've done work across Southwark, Lambeth, Lewisham, Greater Manchester. I've done a lot of work over the years.
Wow.
So I've seen a lot, been through a lot, I've seen a lot of changes. And I always say to people, I started off as like a young man. So everybody was like old enough to be like my little brother or sister. Now everyone's old enough to be my child. So I have a different mind frame, but it's all good.
You know, it's interesting hearing these stories, but you started young, you had the passion and everything, but wasn't there a time that you ever felt that I don't want to do this? Or was there ever a time you said, I don't want this, I can't do this? It's not a nice thing.
Actually, I'd never felt that, Margaret. I always wanted to do this. I think even till today, I get up and I still want to do it. I think there's challenges in our sector, working as youth workers over a long period of time. I've done a little bit more than Ryan than the 20 years. And I think, youth work has changed. And that's when you feel the challenges and you take that challenge on. So it's not like you don't want to give this up. So you want to take that challenge on. It actually encouraged me more to say, you know what, I need to do this work to support that generation of young people. There's frustrations in our work, because of the way the youth service has, lost a lot of its funding and resources over the decades. And that's, again, it's starting to slightly rebuild back. But there's frustrations around, when you think there is a solution, you try to work with what you've got, but sometimes you're not even allowed to do that. And when you see there's a redesign of what youth work should look like, it doesn't need a redesign. Youth work works in the way it does. It has worked for years and years. And it needs a model with current situation and the youth culture now. Because social media's played a big impact.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when you feel frustrated, when the powers, people that have got these keys to this funding don't listen and understand this grassroots organisation, that's the only frustration.
Yeah.
I think you feel like, you're trying to do all this work with the minimum you've got. And trying to support communities and young people that are, caught up in these difficult situations. And then the frustration is when, you see funders funding certain programs, certain innovations or research pieces that are being done. You don't need any more research. We know how this solution, and that's why we've lost a lot. And the sad bit is we've lost a lot of youth workers because of that.
Yeah. Did you ever feel that, I don't want to do this?
Yes, I've experienced that a few times. Sadly, I've worked with a few people that have passed away. And I have felt how much, in terms of how much can I give? Because when you're working with young people, you do build a rapport with them. You see them quite often. And when somebody passes, it can be devastating.
Yeah.
And it's devastating for the community. And you can only imagine how the parents feel.
Yeah.
And there's been a few times when I felt, can I keep on doing this? But then I say to myself, I should keep on doing this because I care. And because I care, I feel I still have a purpose here.
Yeah.
And I try to, as I was saying to you before, I've got to the stage now where everyone's old enough to, or everyone, well, I'm old enough to be everyone's parent. Yeah. So I look at it as like a responsibility in a way. And I don't want to see any parent that are losing a child, and I don't want to see a child pass away. So anything that I can do in terms of setting up projects, in terms of mentoring, anything I can do to help that not happen,
you're ready for it.
I'm ready for it. So I've taken on that responsibility.
Wow. This is encouraging, really, but we still have the problem. So what is the problem? We've got people like you, and I believe there are many more like you guys, and I see it all the time that we are trying to support our community, our young people. Is it that they're not engaging? What is the issue with youth violence, really? Because I don't know, a few days ago, was it last week, we heard about young people being, situations happening at Burgess Park. We've had young people being arrested in Lewisham. We've had a situation in Clapham. And it's like every time you think, it's better, or the stats might say, it's reduced in Southwark, or it's more in this place or that. But it's still there. What is the problem with youth violence? Because that is the topic we want to look at.
Can I start with that one, if that's okay? 90% of our brains, it develops before the age of 5 years old.
Yeah.
So any unmet need or exposed to trauma is going to be seen later on in years. And I think that's what we are seeing. The results of series of unmet needs and exposure to trauma at a young age. And I also believe what's also happening is that due to social media and other forms of access that we have now, situations has been able to escalate and go further afield a lot more faster than before. everyone's got a voice in the internet.
Yeah.
And because everyone's got a voice in the internet, there's a lot of misinformation that is being spoken about. And if you're a young person who's experienced trauma and mental needs or whatever it may be difficult to differentiate who is a good role model and who isn't. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of the people that are in prison now have learning difficulties.
Yeah. I know
and there's over 100,000 young people who are on the waiting list for mental health support. So with all that being said, we have to look at what was going on in the early years, not necessarily what's been happening within the last couple of years.
Yeah. Can I just even add, there's also the cultural implications as well. We have a lot of families that, part of the work I do, working with parents and families that are from different cultural backgrounds as well, not understanding the system. And that can be frustrating for young people as well. Them not being heard, not just at home, but even at, within the school system and having people that like you that understands that might be helpful. But we do have a lot of young Black boys in the criminal system at the moment. Ollie, what about you?
So I think, if I can go back a bit, I think when Active Communities was set up, Active Communities Network, it was set up to respond to the services that was being cut back at the time. And, we set on a journey to support young people at grassroots level. Because I think, being that first responder, but we used football as a tool. And there was many, going back to cultural, on the States, there was many languages spoken, but sports had this power to engage young people. They all understand how to play football. So I think that was our tool to use that. By that time, we saw it was low-level incidents where young people was happy slapping. You may remember back in the days when young people were happy slapping. And we always saw when it was a knife incident or a gun crime at the time or a gun incident, it was big news. Resources were cut, youth work went, schools were changing, they were becoming academies. There was the local authorities were responding to different ways in that we lost Sure Start. So going back to Ryan's point, that early point, which is a crucial part.
I'm Sure Start really, so that's my background. Yeah.
So there you go. So you would understand that early that what Ryan spoke about. So when you lose all of those services to young people that are highly need that service, you get this mixture of problems. We've now, over the time when we set out, we saw social media grow in the last 20 years as Active Communities came along. We was taking on new challenges and new ways of understanding how young people are responding to each other. Now, it's easy to blame music, and that music was always there, so you can't blame music. Yeah,
they always blame. I don't know why. Why were they blaming music?
It's just, at that time, there's drill music coming out, there's the grime scene, but music was always there. So youth culture movement, if it's not here, it was in the 70s and 60s. Yes, there may be some part of it, but it's easy to point the finger at that. So when you got that issue, in areas of where myself, Ryan worked mainly in Southwark and Lambeth, when there's a high population of young Black boys getting caught up in the criminal justice system, there's a disparity in responding to that, to how to help them. There was not enough understanding. There wasn't, as there is today, a lot more knowledge-based youth workers or individuals or practitioners. And I think what happened was, even that, they didn't understand the cultural sensitivity around the Caribbean children, the African children, the Asian children. Now we're seeing the South American children and the Somali community. No one really understood all these communities. They have intricacies at home. Young people usually have this mask when they're at home. They take it off when they go out. They put it back on when they go home. Yeah,
and then when you now say, "Oh, Mom, your son," said, "No, it's not my son. It's not my daughter." No,
it's not my daughter. And then and that's not anyone's fault. It's because the culture at home, whatever culture is, whatever they're practicing, everyone wants the child to do better.
Yeah.
Unless you come from a chaotic background, it's slightly different. And I think what we saw, services didn't understand those cultural sensitivities. They didn't understand those needs of those young people. And I think they still don't understand the full need of those communities. And I think what happens is that, they're designed out for a mass group of community, but it's not the same. Because even if you come from a Caribbean background or an African background, Asian background, it's not just the culture. At home, it's slightly, there's some other developments, needs that need to be supported. Well, Ryan talks about that anyway, because it could be early, so the parents need the support.
Yeah, it might be abuse at home, it might be housing issues, immigration issues. There's a lot, and that impact on the mental health of that young person.
And I think what we saw is what we saw over the years in that time, it was the voluntary sector, it was the youth workers that were left for picking up all these difficulties that we saw in the community. And it was deep-rooted in the communities. And these young people came from different faith backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds. they came from inner city issues that were, financial crisis. Before COVID came along, they was always there. They were growing in poverty.
Yeah.
They were living on top of each other.
Yeah.
The youth population grew rapidly in these hyper local areas. The challenging grew to a point where it was going to explode into these situations, and it wasn't. Yes, there was gangs and this, that, but
gangs. I want to talk about.
But I think going back before even to the gangs bit, I think cultural understanding for services that were designing it wrong, and the ones that designed services for these young people to support them, people weren't ready to take on some of the complex situation young people growing up in current day.
But then that's why some young people say, there's a professional that might want to meet a young person and say, well, you don't know me. Why would I listen? And that's where the trust element comes in. So nobody wants to. I don't trust you. So why would I answer to you? That kind of thing.
And I think trust, where I could talk about a little bit more about trust with some of the younger ones that are coming through that become youth workers and coaches, and they trust us. So when they see us, we've got a young population of youth workers and coaches in our organisation, they respond to them and then they understand.
But did they? But do you say they trust you? But did that not grow? Is it not a process? Because sometimes, with what they've gone through, they might not be there yet. And then did you not have to do a lot more work to get them to trust you? Or did it just happen automatically?
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Like it can take a month. It could take 2 years.
Wow.
Because but if you're working with young people, some are coming up and experience complex situations. So some young people has experienced and been exposed to certain things that are horrifying. So when they come into like a youth setting, youth club or sports facility, they're closed off. So youth workers, in a sense, have to be that constant. Have to be there constantly. So we have to understand that, okay, certain behaviors or certain opinions that they may have, we may not agree with it, but it's up for us to unravel that to see, okay, why do you think like this? How could you act like that?
That's a big skill. That's a good...
Yeah, and it does take patience, yeah? Now, as you go through that time and the sort of barrier, that could be like a year. And as I was saying before, some projects are only funded for a year or two. So just about when you're getting the result of getting through to young people, funding can be stopped.
Wow.
So then the young person now feels, why do I even bother? So they come even more reserved than before, and it will be harder for the next person.
They resist the support.
Yeah.
I want to ask some, I need us to tell some real stories now, because we've been saying these things but what are the things that you've seen that you feel that show this problem really? Are there any stories? What is it? I want to hear from both of you.
Just kind of, it's a collective story, like lots of young people. I think what happened was, over this period of time when we was underinvested in youth programs and when we've, been starting to get investment back in, we need to understand the new youth culture that's coming through. The issues that why knife crime has become normalised to young people. Carrying a knife has been normalised. What's happening? Like, why are these young people having outbursts, moment of madness, and start want to kill someone? So we needed to understand that. And I think more recently we're starting to understand and pick up some of those issues. Mental health. We never spoke about mental health early days of youth work. We never really understood the chaos that young people are going through at home. It's poverty, it's inequality in these communities that, unfortunately, that leads to these normalization of carrying a knife, because that's the one part that young people were carrying it because they didn't feel frightened anymore. It became a norm, so they wanted to either protect themselves from getting stabbed, or they were looking to stab somebody because of peer pressure. And there's different peer pressure. Yeah,
because I've also heard and seen as well, when a young person takes a knife into school, they might want to protect themselves, but then they get excluded at the same time. Is that the solution then? If they have to be excluded because they're carrying a knife, or they're saying that I'm doing it to protect myself because nobody's going to protect me. So you can see there's a double-edged thing there. So the schools, what are the schools doing? What is,
Schools were trained to tackle that situation. We had a police force that has changed, and it's trying to fix itself, correct itself. And, that's with Stop and Search. I think what young people have gone through is a combination of quick technology, exposure to social media, things that they're seeing that they shouldn't be seeing at a younger age. It's normalized because of it became an outburst of knife crime films, knife crime games, everything was about knife crime. The conversation at home, the school weren't ready for it, services weren't ready for it. And I think what happened was these young people had a family outside of home.
Yeah.
That became their family because they couldn't relate to their parents at home. Not of any parents' fault. They couldn't relate to the schools. The academy trusts had this rule that, young people weren't abide by. And as soon as they left the school, they became different. And I think it's a combination. And I think mental health, undiagnosed issues in our communities, and it has a ripple effect. Even if it's the parents, it affects the child.
Yeah.
And I think that is something we're learning even now as youth workers in the work that we do. I don't think we have the right solutions. No. And there's so much more to do.
We'll talk about,
But I think what the solutions in that period of time was actually designed wrong. And that's why we didn't see the impact that we wanted to see. And we saw this huge increase in the root issue is more complex than the one straight answer, one finger pointing out this is the problem.
I think that's the key thing. There's not just one solution. Any stories from your side, Ryan? Anything that makes it real to say, look, this youth violence is real. Any examples or any stories you want to?
There is one. I can't say the borough, no. But I was working within a borough, and I was managing a project there. It was quite a big project, and there was a lot of funding at one stage, and there was a lot of need. And why I was there, and before as well, because I didn't set the project up. I wouldn't say that I set the project up, but there was a bit of groundwork there. But I stepped in and I done a half decent job. And the funding got cut. And before I left, I did say to them, even if you're not going to have the project as big as it is now, still have a presence here because there is a need. There is funding out there, but it's going to be somebody that's got the willpower and the want to go and get it because the need was there. The funding was cut altogether, and fast forward, a boy that came to the session, he got killed within the area. And one of the sad thing about it was, years down the line, we found that the killers were also from the area as well. So they all knew each other. And I always say to myself, not to say that would have never happened.
Yeah.
But I do say if some sort of project initiative was still going on, even half as what was going on before, that may have been prevented. Or those that was involved, somebody might have said something to one of the coaches or members of staff. And they may have been able, and this is just saying like hypothetically, they may have been able to say, come on guys, you've all known each other for this amount of time. You all are come from the same area. Let's not make it escalate. But that wasn't there. And unfortunately, the boy lost his life.
It's sad. One of the things I think about, now you can correct me. This is a place we just talk freely, and yet in those days, our parents used to tell us that if you have an issue, you fight it out. And that was a release, like you fight it out, you shake hands, in those days, it's like, trust me, I used to fight. I said, yeah, telling you now. So we go to school, get my uniform torn, get a smacking, but you fight, you release energy. But those fights now, the people are now saying that maybe if that was still there in the sense, instead of people, but now it's like carrying a knife or carrying a gun. So there's no real release of anger. So what's your take on that? Because the violence that we see, is it not, like I know you said it before, you referred to maybe what they've seen or watching, but we used to watch things then as well. But is it that there's no space where you can release those angers or have those arguments, but have it in such a constructive way? I don't know what, as youth workers, what you think.
That's the bit that's underfunded, is that prevention work. Working with young people, giving them the space, a safe space, having regular youth workers in the community, the long-term funding that Ryan spoke about, that situation just Ryan described. I think, you can prevent a lot if you talk to young people. I think the power of talking to young people is still there. It still works because you can build trust with them. They do need outlets, where they can outlet either through sports, through whatever it is that they feel comfortable with. But I think, prevention in the work that we see as that early responder youth work, you need outreach workers, you need detached workers, you need safe spaces. You need where, that trusted adults that has a relationship with those young people. And
we're going to talk more about the prevention because I think that's a very key thing. We've been emphasizing a lot on that, and I wanted us to do that on this podcast to say, what are the issues? What are the problems? And we want to talk a bit more about the prevention. And I'm hoping that we're going to do that at the second part. So watch this space, guys. I want to say thank you to Ollie and Ryan. Like I said, this is the first part of talking about this subject. We're going to come back again and look at what do we do to prevent youth violence, if at all it can be prevented. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Echoes of Our Community. Echoes of Our